Meet Jaden, a 12-year-old boy living in the rundown neighborhood of Thornwood. His life is far from easy, with his family struggling to make ends meet. Jaden and his mother, Clara, live in a small, cramped apartment where every day is a fight to survive. Clara works long hours as a nurse, barely managing to cover the rent and basic needs. Though their circumstances are tough, Jaden has learned to find joy in the little things. He spends his afternoons reading comic books or playing basketball with friends in the alley. Despite the hardships, Jaden has a heart of gold, always ready to lend a hand to those in need. However, his life is about to change in a way he never imagined. One afternoon, while out running an errand for his mother, Jaden witnesses an accident that will alter his fate. A baby stroller rolls into the busy street, and without thinking, Jaden rushes to the rescue, narrowly saving the infant from an oncoming truck. Little did he know that this act of bravery would soon lead him into a world of wealth, mystery, and danger. Before he could even comprehend the magnitude of what he had done, Jaden's family would receive an unexpected gift, and with it, their lives would be thrust into a world of luxury, one that might not be as perfect as it seems. If you enjoyed this start to Jaden's story, be sure to like and subscribe for more exciting twists ahead. It was an ordinary Wednesday afternoon when everything changed for Jaden. The sun hung high in the sky, casting long shadows on the cracked pavement of Thornwood, a neighborhood that had seen better days. Jaden had just finished a long, tedious day at school, and the weight of homework was already starting to settle in. He was eager to head home, drop his backpack off, and maybe spend some time shooting hoops or reading a new comic book. But today, fate had something else in mind for him. He made his way down the street, his worn sneakers tapping against the pavement with each step. The air was thick with the scent of car exhaust and food from the nearby corner store, where a group of older kids usually hung out. Jaden wasn't particularly in the mood to join them. The thought of a quiet evening at home sounded more appealing. He quickly passed by the store, nodding in greeting to the few familiar faces he saw along the way. As he neared the intersection near the bus stop, he slowed his pace. The usual group of people waiting for the bus were there, murmuring to one another, some staring at their phones, others simply lost in thought. Jaden took a brief moment to glance at the far side of the street, where a few children were playing with a makeshift soccer ball in front of a dilapidated apartment building. It was then that he saw it, a stroller, slowly rolling toward the curb, abandoned by its inattentive mother, who was chatting away on her phone. Oblivious to the peril, the stroller, seemingly of its own accord, began drifting toward the busy street. A truck was speeding toward the intersection, unaware of the impending danger. The baby inside the stroller began to wail, its cries growing louder as the stroller gained momentum. Jaden's heart skipped a beat. His mind went blank for a split second, processing the situation in what felt like slow motion. In the next instant, his body was already in motion, propelled by instinct. Without even thinking, he pushed through the crowd of people waiting at the bus stop and sprinted toward the stroller. He could feel his feet pounding against the ground, adrenaline coursing through his veins. The truck was closing in fast, its engine roaring as it sped toward the intersection. Time seemed to stretch as Jaden reached the stroller, but not fast enough. He could hear the tires screeching, the sound of the truck's horn blaring as it desperately tried to avoid him. Jaden dove forward, arms outstretched, and managed to grab the handle of the stroller just as the front wheels reached the edge of the curb. With a final burst of energy, he yanked the stroller back toward the sidewalk, his body crashing to the ground with the baby still safely in tow. The truck roared past, narrowly missing Jaden as he rolled on the pavement. He felt the impact of the ground against his back, pain shooting through his body, but he didn't care. His focus remained on the baby, who had stopped crying, now safely secured in the stroller. Still unaware of the close call it had just experienced, Jaden lay there for a moment, breathing heavily, trying to process what had just happened. His mind was still racing, the adrenaline slowly fading, replaced by a sharp ache in his legs and arms. He could hear voices around him now, people gasping, murmuring in awe at what they had just witnessed. "Kid, you okay?" A man's voice called out from the crowd, a gruff voice mixed with concern. Jaden looked up, his vision blurry for a moment as he tried to sit up. The pain was undeniable, but it wasn't anything he hadn't experienced before. "Yeah," he managed to mutter, feeling a rush of dizziness. Just the baby." The man, who had been watching the whole event unfold, approached him, helping him sit up. "You did something good today, kid. Not everyone would have done that." Jaden nodded slowly, his eyes still fixed on the stroller. The baby was still silent, gazing up with wide eyes, completely unaware of how close it had come to danger. The mother, who had been oblivious until now, finally turned around at the sound of the crowd. Her face turned pale as she saw the situation unfolding in front of her. "What happened?" she exclaimed, rushing forward. "Oh my God, my baby." She rushed to the stroller, checking the baby's safety before turning to Jaden. You saved my child." Jaden wasn't sure what to say. The adrenaline was still pulsing through his body, making it hard to think clearly. "It was nothing. Just lucky, I guess." The woman's face softened, her worry replaced by gratitude. "You're not just lucky. You're a hero. Thank you." Jaden didn't know how to respond. He wasn't looking for praise. He just wanted to make sure the baby was safe. But something in the woman's eyes, a deep gratitude, mixed with something else, caught his attention. It was as though, in that moment, he had somehow become more than just a regular kid from Thornwood. Before he could say anything further, the sound of sirens cut through the air. An ambulance and a police car had arrived at the scene, their lights flashing. The crowd, which had begun to gather around Jaden and the woman, parted as the emergency responders took over. They checked the baby over carefully, ensuring that everything was okay. Thankfully, the child was unharmed, merely shaken by the experience. Jaden stood there, still feeling a strange sense of detachment, his body sore but his mind reeling. The police officers approached him, their expression serious. Yet there was something almost approving in their eyes. "You're the one who saved the child, right?" one of the officers asked, his voice low. Jaden nodded, unsure of what to say. "Yeah, I was just trying to help." "You did more than help," the officer replied, a small smile creeping across his face. "You saved a life today. You should be proud." Jaden felt a lump rise in his throat. It wasn't that he was proud. He had just done what anyone would have done. But the officer's words made him realize that he had done something significant, something that could have changed the course of the baby's life forever. As the officers took statements and the ambulance prepared to leave, the crowd began to disperse. But Jaden couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. The moment, the event, would stay with him forever. And what followed next would be even more unexpected. After the chaos of the rescue event, Jaden found himself back in the familiar routine of everyday life, though with an unexpected twist. It wasn't long before word of his brave act spread throughout Thornwood. The news was plastered on social media, broadcasted by local news stations, and shared amongst friends, family, and neighbors. People who had once hardly noticed him were now giving him approving nods, smiles, and even pats on the back. It was strange how quickly the attention could change someone's life. Even for a brief moment, Jaden hadn't been looking for recognition, but he was certainly getting more of it than he had ever imagined. However, one particular figure in his life seemed especially interested in his newfound fame: Carlton. Carlton was a wealthy entrepreneur who lived in the most opulent house in Thornwood. His mansion, a grand structure of stone and glass, was perched at the top of a hill, casting its long shadow over the rest of the neighborhood. Carlton had made a name for himself by investing in a variety of businesses, and he was known for his extravagant lifestyle and his occasional acts of philanthropy. Despite his wealth, he wasn't someone Jaden had ever thought much about. Carlton kept to himself for the most part, only making occasional appearances at community events or fundraisers. But when Carlton reached out to Jaden after the rescue, things took a surprising turn. It started with a phone call on the very same day as the incident. Jaden had just returned home from school, still feeling the aftereffects of the adrenaline rush. His mom had just made dinner, and the familiar smells of spaghetti and garlic bread filled the house. He was about to sit down to eat when his phone rang. "Hello?" Jaden answered, glancing at the number. It wasn't a number he recognized. "Is this Jaden?" a voice asked. Smooth and confident. "Yeah, this is Jaden." "Who's calling?" Jaden replied, confused. "This is Carlton. I live on the hill, near the top of the neighborhood. I believe you saved a child's life today," Carlton said, his voice warm yet tinged with something Jaden couldn't quite place. There was a pause as if the man was assessing Jaden's reaction. Jaden was taken aback. He hadn't expected someone like Carlton to know who he was, let alone reach out. Yeah, that's me. I just did what anyone would have done," Jaden mumbled, suddenly feeling uncomfortable under the weight of the attention. Carlton chuckled, the sound deep and reassuring. "I think it's more than that. What you did today was extraordinary. Jaden, you showed real courage, and I want to make sure you know how much it's appreciated. I'd like to meet you." Jaden's heart raced. He had no idea why someone like Carlton would want to meet him, especially after such a small act on his part. Sure. When?" Jaden asked, still unsure of the situation. "How about this weekend? I'd like to personally thank you for what you did. I have a few things I'd like to give you. It'll be a small gathering at my place, nothing too fancy, just a few close friends," Carlton explained, his tone warm and inviting. Jaden hesitated, unsure of how to respond. This felt a little too much for him. He wasn't used to receiving gifts or recognition for doing something that, in his mind, was just a normal response to a dangerous situation. But then again, Carlton was offering a rare opportunity. It wasn't every day someone like him would extend an invitation. "I guess I could come by," Jaden said finally, trying to mask the uncertainty in his voice. He was a little nervous, but curiosity tugged at him. After all, what could it hurt to meet someone who had so much to offer? The weekend arrived, and Jaden found himself standing outside Carlton's mansion, staring up at the towering gates. The house was even grander up close, its glass walls reflecting the sunlight like something out of a movie. He had never been this close to the homes of the rich, especially not someone like Carlton, who seemed to live in a world entirely separate from his own. He rang the doorbell, his palms sweaty with nervousness. A few moments later, a well-dressed butler opened the door, greeting him with a polite smile. "Welcome, young man. Mr. Carlton is expecting you. Please, come inside." Jaden stepped into the foyer, his sneakers squeaking against the marble floor. The house was as grand on the inside as it was on the outside, with high ceilings, ornate chandeliers, and a collection of fine art lining the walls. He couldn't help but feel out of place, his jeans and hoodie starkly contrasting the elegance of the surroundings. Carlton appeared soon after, dressed in a sharp suit that made him look every bit the part of a successful businessman. He greeted Jaden with a firm handshake, his eyes sparkling with sincerity. "Jaden, it's a pleasure to meet you in person. I can't tell you how much it means to me to finally thank you for what you did." "Thanks for the invite," Jaden said, still feeling a bit uncomfortable. "I didn't really do anything special." Carlton smiled, leading him through the spacious halls toward a large living room where a few other guests were gathered. They were all dressed impeccably, sipping drinks and chatting amongst themselves. Jaden felt like an outsider, unsure of how to fit in with this crowd. "Please, make yourself at home," Carlton said, motioning toward a chair by the fireplace. "I know this might be a bit overwhelming, but I wanted to express my gratitude in a way that I felt would be meaningful." Before Jaden could respond, a server came by with a tray of appetizers, offering them to him. He picked up a small pastry and took a bite, trying to calm his nerves. It was then that Carlton excused himself for a moment and returned with a velvet box in hand. He opened it to reveal a thick, heavy gold chain with a pendant shaped like a star. "I want you to have this," Carlton said, his voice serious. "It's a token of my appreciation. This chain has been passed down through my family for generations. I believe it represents bravery, strength, and the courage to do the right thing, no matter the cost. I want you to wear it, and let it remind you of what you did today." Jaden's eyes widened in disbelief. He hadn't expected anything like this. A chain like that, something so valuable, was beyond anything he could have imagined. He opened his mouth to protest, but Carlton held up his hand. I know this may be a lot, but you deserve it. You showed a level of selflessness that many adults couldn't even muster. Please, take it as a gift from me to you." Jaden hesitated, but there was no way to turn down something like this. He took the chain in his hands, feeling its weight. It was cold to the touch, but there was something about it that made him feel connected to the moment, the choice he had made in that instant to save a life. As the evening wore on, Carlton continued to lavish Jaden with gifts. There were books, new sneakers, and even a gift card for a shopping spree at the best mall in the city. The entire experience felt surreal, like something out of a dream. But despite the opulence and the extravagance, Jaden couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Carlton's gestures than mere gratitude. There was something behind his actions that Jaden couldn't quite put his finger on. As the days went by after the extravagant event at Carlton's mansion, Jaden found himself slipping into a new chapter of his life, one that was both exciting and unsettling. The gifts, the recognition, and the overwhelming gratitude that he had received seemed to mark a turning point in his life. But as much as the attention felt flattering, it was also foreign. Jaden had always been a quiet, introverted teenager who found comfort in his routine. He had never dreamed of becoming the center of attention, let alone receiving gifts from the wealthiest man in the neighborhood. The gold chain Carlton had given him now hung around his neck, a constant reminder of the strange day when his life had shifted dramatically. It was hard to shake the feeling that something larger was at play, something beyond mere gratitude for his actions. Despite his discomfort with the attention, Jaden had grown used to it. His friends at school now looked at him differently. They treated him with a newfound respect, almost as if he had somehow become a hero overnight. People whispered about him in the halls, asking if it was true that he had saved a child's life. Some even joked about him being destined for greatness, though Jaden wasn't sure whether to laugh or feel overwhelmed by their comments. He wasn't a hero. He was just a kid who had done what he thought was right. But the stories that others told about his actions only seemed to magnify his role, creating a persona he didn't quite recognize. However, it wasn't just his social life that was changing. His home life, too, began to feel different. His parents had always been supportive of him, but lately, they seemed to be treating him with a bit more reverence, perhaps in response to the stories circulating about his bravery. His mom, in particular, had taken to preparing special meals and buying him things he hadn't asked for: new clothes, a nicer phone, and even a car keychain as a subtle hint that she hoped he would soon drive. It was as if the world was suddenly offering him everything he hadn't known he needed. But as much as Jaden had adjusted to his new life, there were still moments that felt off. There were strange occurrences that made him question what was really going on. They were small things at first, things that seemed too insignificant to mention. But in hindsight, they painted a picture of something far stranger than he could have ever anticipated. It started with the dream. It was a warm night, the kind of night that felt peaceful and easy to drift into sleep. Jaden had been lying in bed, staring up at the ceiling, the soft hum of the fan lulling him into a state of half-consciousness. He was just about to drift off when he felt a sudden chill wash over him. It wasn't the coolness of the air. It was something deeper, a chill that seemed to penetrate his bones, making him shiver despite the warmth of the room. He pulled the blanket tightly around himself, hoping it would pass. But as he closed his eyes, the chill didn't dissipate, it only grew stronger. Then, in the darkness of his room, Jaden saw it. A figure stood at the foot of his bed. It was tall and thin, shrouded in shadow, with no discernible features. Its presence felt overwhelming, like a weight pressing down on him. And yet, it didn't move. It simply stood there. Watching him, Jaden's heart raced, but his body was frozen. Unable to move or speak, he tried to scream, but no sound came out. His breath hitched in his throat, and the more he tried to will himself to act, the more paralyzed he felt. Just as quickly as the figure had appeared, it was gone. The room returned to its normal state, the darkness now no longer oppressive, and the chill faded as if it had never been there. Jaden's mind raced, trying to rationalize what he had just experienced. It was a dream, he told himself. It had to have been a dream. But as he lay in the darkness, heart pounding, he couldn't shake the feeling that something about it had been real. The next day, Things seemed to return to normal. At least, on the surface. Jaden went to school, met up with his friends, and tried to focus on the small things in life. Yet, a nagging sensation lingered in the back of his mind. It was as if something had shifted, something he couldn't explain. Over the next few weeks, the strange occurrences escalated. He would hear faint whispers in the middle of the night, soft, unintelligible voices that seemed to come from nowhere. They weren't the voices of his family members or anyone he knew. No matter how hard he tried to listen, the words were always just out of reach. The whispers would stop just as suddenly as they had started, leaving him feeling unsettled and confused. One afternoon, after school, Jaden walked home alone. It was a cool, overcast day, and the streets of Thornwood were unusually quiet. He had just turned the corner onto his street when he noticed something odd. In the distance, Carlton's mansion stood like it always did, its gleaming windows reflecting the gray sky. But something was different. The air around the house seemed to shimmer, almost as if it were distorting, as if reality itself were bending in on itself. Jaden's footsteps slowed, and his heart began to race. He was certain he had seen something, but when he looked again, everything appeared normal. Am I losing my mind? Jaden muttered to himself, shaking his head. He wasn't sure why, but the mansion felt more like a looming presence than ever before, as if it was watching him, waiting for something he couldn't quite understand. That evening, Jaden tried to push the strange occurrences from his mind. He ate dinner with his parents, who didn't seem to notice his growing unease. Afterward, he retired to his room, his eyes lingering on the gold chain Carlton had given him. He hadn't taken it off since the night of the rescue, and yet, every time he looked at it, he felt a strange sense of foreboding. The chain, once a symbol of admiration, now felt like a weight around his neck, its presence both comforting and suffocating at the same time. As he lay in bed that night, trying to sleep, Jaden couldn't help but feel the pull of the unknown, the strange occurrences, the eerie sensations, and the lingering sense that something was wrong. He wasn't sure what was happening, but he knew that it was only a matter of time before the truth would reveal itself, whether he was ready for it or not. And in the darkness, as he stared at the ceiling once more, Jaden could feel the presence again. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was there. The feeling of being watched, of something lurking just beyond the edge of his awareness. He closed his eyes, trying to shake the feeling, but deep down, he knew that whatever was happening, it wasn't just in his mind. It was real. As the weeks passed, Jaden's sense of unease only grew stronger. The strange occurrences he had experienced became more frequent, and each time, he found himself drawn back to the one thing that seemed to be the source of his disquiet, the mansion of Carlton, the man who had changed his life forever. No matter how much he tried to dismiss his feelings or rationalize the bizarre events, one undeniable fact stood before him. Something about Carlton and his extravagant lifestyle didn't add up. Jaden had been living in a constant state of tension, his every step seemingly watched by unseen eyes. Even at school, where the other kids continued to treat him as a hero, he felt like an outsider, disconnected from the world he had once known. His friends had no idea what was happening, and his parents, ever the supportive figures in his life, seemed oblivious to the strange shifts in their son's behavior. But Jaden couldn't shake the feeling that something dark was lurking beneath the surface of all the kindness Carlton had shown him. It all began the day Jaden decided to take matters into his own hands. He had been lying in bed one night, staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep, when a thought struck him like a lightning bolt. What if everything he knew about Carlton was a lie? The more he thought about it, the more everything seemed to point back to the same conclusion. The mansion, the gifts, the attention, it all felt too good to be true. There was something wrong, and Jaden needed to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. The next morning, Jaden put his plan into action. He had never been one to act impulsively, but something inside him urged him to find out more about Carlton. He couldn't ignore the feeling that he was caught in a web, and the only way to escape it was to understand what was really going on. Armed with his curiosity and a growing sense of determination, Jaden set off toward the mansion. The walk to Carlton's mansion felt different this time. The air was heavy with tension, and the streets seemed unnaturally quiet. As Jaden approached the grand estate, he couldn't help but notice how much it had changed since that night, the night when he had been invited inside, celebrated like a hero, and given gifts he never thought he would receive. The mansion's imposing structure now loomed before him like an ancient relic, its windows dark and foreboding. There was a chill in the air that made his skin crawl, but Jaden pressed on, determined to uncover whatever secrets the mansion held. As he neared the front gate, he hesitated for a moment, unsure of what he was about to do. But the feeling in his chest, an undeniable pull, compelled him to push forward. The large, ornate gate creaked open as he stepped through, and Jaden found himself walking down the long, winding driveway that led to the front door. It felt as though the mansion itself was watching him, its walls whispering secrets he could barely hear. When he reached the door, he was about to knock when he noticed something strange. A small side window, just to the left of the door, was slightly ajar. Without thinking, Jaden approached it cautiously, his heart pounding in his chest. He peered inside, and what he saw made his stomach drop. The interior of the mansion was as lavish as he remembered, but this time, Jaden could see something that made his blood run cold. In the far corner of the room, a large bookshelf was partially obscured by an expensive-looking rug. But it wasn't the bookshelf or the rug that caught his attention. It was the door that lay hidden behind them, a door that appeared to be old and weathered, as though it hadn't been used in years. There was something unsettling about it, something that screamed of secrets locked away and forgotten. Without a second thought, Jaden quietly stepped around the side of the mansion and found his way to the back. He had no idea what he was looking for, but the feeling that something wasn't right refused to leave him. He needed answers. As he made his way around the back of the mansion, he saw a small door leading to what looked like a basement. The door was partially open, and from inside, Jaden could hear the faintest sound, a soft scraping noise, as though something was being dragged across the floor. His curiosity got the better of him, and he crept closer, inching his way toward the door. He hesitated for a moment, his mind racing with the consequences of what he was about to do. But there was no turning back now. He pushed the door open and slipped inside. The basement was dimly lit, the air musty with the scent of old wood and dust. Jaden's eyes adjusted to the darkness, and he was immediately struck by the sight before him. Rows upon rows of shelves lined the walls, each shelf filled with strange objects, old books, peculiar artifacts, and vials filled with liquids of every color imaginable. But it wasn't the objects that caught his attention. It was the figure standing in the center of the room. Carlton. He was standing in front of a large, ornate mirror, his back to Jaden. He was muttering something under his breath, but Jaden couldn't make out the words. The moment seemed frozen in time, as though the world itself was holding its breath. For a brief moment, Jaden considered turning around and leaving, but something told him that he had to stay. He had to know what Carlton was up to. Slowly, cautiously, Jaden stepped forward, his heart hammering in his chest. As he moved closer, he could hear Carlton speaking more clearly, his voice low and unintelligible. But then, something strange happened. The air in the room seemed to shift, and Jaden felt a sudden pressure on his chest, as though an invisible force was pushing him back. Jaden. Carlton's voice cut through the tension, causing Jaden to freeze in his tracks. I've been expecting you. Jaden's heart skipped a beat. He had been caught. Carlton turned around, his expression unreadable. The look in his eyes sent a chill down Jaden's spine. He had never seen Carlton look like this before, his calm, collected demeanor replaced by something darker, something almost otherworldly. I knew you'd come, Carlton said, his voice barely above a whisper. I wasn't sure when, but I knew. I've been watching you. Jaden, you're more connected to all of this than you realize. Jaden's mind raced. What is this? He demanded. What's going on? Why have you been giving me all of this stuff? The chain, the attention. It doesn't make sense. Carlton smiled, though it was not a comforting smile. It was the kind of smile someone gives when they know something you don't. You've always been special, Jaden. You just didn't know it yet. Jaden felt a wave of confusion wash over him. Special? I'm just a kid. Carlton interrupted him, his voice suddenly sharp. You are no ordinary kid. Jaden, you've been chosen. And the time has come for you to understand what that truly means. Jaden took a step back, his mind reeling. Chosen for what? Carlton didn't answer immediately. Instead, he turned back toward the mirror, his eyes reflecting a flicker of something Jaden couldn't quite place. The room grew colder, and the weight of the air around him seemed to press in from all sides. Come closer, Jaden, Carlton said softly, his voice almost hypnotic. It's time you learned the truth. The chilling words echoed in Jaden's mind as he stood there, frozen in place. You've been chosen. It was as though Carlton had flipped a switch, revealing a side of himself that was both dark and unsettling. Jaden's heart pounded in his chest, every beat a reminder of how much he didn't know about the man who had seemingly turned his life upside down. He had come looking for answers, but what he had discovered was far more sinister than anything he had expected. Carlton's eyes glinted with something Jaden couldn't decipher, a combination of triumph and something darker, more dangerous. The atmosphere in the room grew heavier by the second, and Jaden felt his body tense up, as though the air itself was thickening with an invisible force. It wasn't just the mirror or the strange objects in the room, it was Carlton himself. There was something ancient, something malevolent, hiding behind his calm, charismatic facade. You've been looking for answers, Carlton continued, his voice soft but laden with an almost predatory tone. But what you don't understand, Jaden, is that the answers you seek will change everything. The truth is not something you can simply walk away from. It's a power, a force, and you're tied to it in ways you can't yet comprehend. Jaden's thoughts raced. He had always been a curious kid, but this was something beyond his understanding. He had no idea what Carlton was talking about or why he had been drawn into this twisted web. And yet, despite the fear creeping through his veins, something inside him refused to back down. He wasn't just going to accept Carlton's cryptic words as the truth. He needed to know more. Why me? Jaden demanded, his voice shaking slightly despite his efforts to remain composed. Why have you chosen me? What is this all about? Carlton's smile widened, though it was anything but comforting. You're not the first, Jaden, he said softly, and you won't be the last. There's a reason I've been so generous with you, a reason I've given you everything you've ever wanted. You are part of something much bigger than yourself. You just have to open your eyes and see it. Jaden's mind reeled. What had Carlton meant by that? How was he a part of something bigger? He had been living his life like any other teenager, and now, all of a sudden, he was at the center of some strange, dark mystery. The more he thought about it, the more his stomach churned with unease. He wasn't sure who Carlton really was anymore or what kind of power he was dealing with. But one thing was clear, the man was dangerous, and he had been manipulating Jaden from the very beginning. As Jaden stood there, staring at the man who had given him everything, money, gifts, attention, a life of luxury, he couldn't shake the feeling that everything he had been told was a lie. Carlton was no mentor, no benefactor. He was a master manipulator, a puppet master pulling strings in the background, and Jaden had been his unwitting pawn. I'm not part of this, Jaden said, his voice growing stronger. I won't be your pawn. Carlton's eyes narrowed, his expression hardening for the first time. You don't have a choice, Jaden, he said, his voice dropping to a low growl. You were chosen because you have something within you that can't be ignored. A power, a potential you don't even realize yet. And now, it's time for you to embrace it. Jaden felt a cold shiver run down his spine. He didn't know what Carlton meant by power or how he had come to be part of this twisted plan. But one thing was clear, Carlton wasn't going to let him walk away easily. And that realization hit Jaden with full force. The danger wasn't just from Carlton. It was from whatever dark forces he had awakened in Jaden's life. He had no idea how deep this conspiracy went or how Carlton had orchestrated everything around him. But Jaden knew one thing for certain. He had to confront Carlton and put an end to this before it spiraled further out of control. The more Carlton talked, the more Jaden realized that this was no ordinary man he was dealing with. He wasn't just a wealthy benefactor with a taste for luxury. He was someone who had been pulling strings for years, weaving a web of deceit and power that was now threatening to consume Jaden entirely. The weight of the situation pressed down on him like a physical force. and Jaden's mind raced as he tried to figure out how to protect himself, how to escape from this nightmare that Carlton had created. But one thing was certain, he couldn't do it alone. If he was going to face Carlton and whatever dark forces were at play, he needed to be prepared. Over the following days, Jaden threw himself into researching everything he could about Carlton. He dug through old newspapers, searched online for any mention of the man, and even visited local libraries to uncover any hidden histories. He found nothing. It was as if Carlton had simply appeared out of nowhere, with no past, no background, no history. The more he searched, the more he realized that Carlton's identity was a carefully constructed facade, a mask that hid whatever dark truth lay behind it. But even as he uncovered more questions than answers, Jaden began to prepare himself. He knew he couldn't go into this blindly. He needed to understand the nature of the power that Carlton had hinted at, the force that he had been trying to awaken within Jaden. There was a strange sense of urgency building inside him, and he knew that time was running out. The deeper he got into this, the more dangerous things became. Jaden started to train himself, physically and mentally, preparing for the confrontation that was inevitable. He took long runs, building his endurance, and started practicing martial arts at a local dojo. It wasn't much, but it was a start. He couldn't afford to be caught off guard. He needed to be ready for whatever Carlton had in store for him. But training wasn't enough. Jaden knew that to confront Carlton, he would need more than just physical strength. He needed to understand what he was up against. So he began reaching out to anyone who might have information about Carlton's past, searching for any clues that could help him piece together the puzzle. One evening, while visiting an old bookstore that specialized in rare, out-of-print books, Jaden stumbled upon something that caught his eye. It was a tattered, leather-bound book, its pages yellowed with age. The title was barely visible, but something about it drew Jaden in. He opened the book and began to read. The book was filled with stories of ancient rituals, secret societies, and dark powers that had existed for centuries. As Jaden flipped through the pages, he found references to a secret group known as the Chosen, a group of individuals who had been selected for their unique abilities and potential to harness great power. The book described the group's origins, their connection to ancient rituals, and their dark goals. It didn't take long for Jaden to realize that Carlton wasn't just some wealthy benefactor. He was part of this secret society, a leader of sorts, and he had been manipulating Jaden from the very start. The book also mentioned a prophecy about a young person with untapped potential who would rise up against the forces of darkness and bring balance to the world. Jaden realized with a sinking feeling that this prophecy was about him, but the path ahead wasn't clear, and the dangers he would face were unlike anything he had ever encountered. Jaden spent the next few days absorbing as much information as he could, training his mind and body for the battle that lay ahead. The time had come to confront Carlton, to face the truth, and to put an end to the dangerous game that had been playing out in the shadows of his life. He knew it wouldn't be easy, but he also knew that there was no turning back. The fate of everything he held dear rested on his shoulders, and he had to be ready for whatever was coming next. It was an ordinary evening when everything changed. The evening air was cool, the sky painted with hues of purple and orange as the sun dipped below the horizon. Jaden had just returned home from another exhausting day of training and research. His mind was still preoccupied with the mysteries surrounding Carlton, the dark forces that loomed over him, and the prophecy he had uncovered. His family had no idea of the danger that was closing in around them. They were blissfully unaware of the nightmare that Jaden had become entangled in. The house was quiet when Jaden entered. His mother was in the kitchen, humming softly as she prepared dinner, and his younger sister, Lily, was on the couch, watching a show. It seemed like a typical evening, a rare moment of peace in the storm that had been his life for the past few weeks. But Jaden couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. A sense of unease gnawed at him, and his instincts told him that danger was closer than ever before. He walked into the kitchen and kissed his mother on the cheek. "Hey, Mom," he said, forcing a smile despite the storm of thoughts swirling in his head. "How was your day?" His mother looked up at him, her tired eyes softening. "It was fine. Jaden, how about you? You look like you've had a long day." Jaden didn't have the heart to tell her the truth. "Same as always," he said, trying to sound casual. "Nothing I can't handle." He glanced over at Lily, who was now engrossed in her show, her eyes fixed on the screen. The sight of his family, so unaware of the danger that threatened them, filled Jaden with a deep sense of dread. He had promised himself that he would protect them, that he would keep them safe from the forces that Carlton had unleashed. But no matter how much he trained, no matter how much he prepared, he couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't ready. Carlton was no ordinary man. He was a force, a dark entity that had the power to destroy everything Jaden loved. Suddenly, the air in the room seemed to grow heavy, and a cold chill swept over Jaden. It was as if the very atmosphere had shifted, as though something unseen was closing in on them. His heart skipped a beat, and his eyes instinctively darted toward the door. Something was coming, something dark, something dangerous. Before he could react, the front door exploded open with a deafening crash, and a figure stepped into the house. The silhouette was tall and imposing, dressed in dark clothing, with an aura of menace that sent a chill down Jaden's spine. The figure's face was obscured by a hood, but Jaden didn't need to see the man's face to know who he was. Carlton's influence was everywhere now. He had sent someone to take the family, to hurt them. Jaden moved quickly, pushing his mother and Lily behind him as he positioned himself between them and the intruder. His mind raced, trying to figure out what to do. The intruder didn't speak. He didn't need to. The cold, calculated look in his eyes was enough to send a message. This wasn't a random attack. This was Carlton's doing. This was the moment Jaden had feared. The moment he had prepared for but never truly believed would come. "Stay back," Jaden ordered, his voice trembling but firm. His body was tense, ready to spring into action. But he knew that he was up against something far more powerful than he had ever faced before. He had only begun to understand the true scope of Carlton's influence. And now, it was too late to turn back. The intruder took a step forward, and with a swift motion, he produced a blade from the folds of his cloak. The glint of the steel reflected the dim light of the room, and Jaden's stomach tightened. He had to protect his family. There was no choice. He couldn't afford to hesitate. The attacker lunged at Jaden, aiming for his chest with the blade. But Jaden was ready. His training had prepared him for moments like this. He ducked under the strike, narrowly avoiding the sharp edge of the weapon. In one fluid motion, he grabbed the intruder's arm and twisted it, sending the blade flying across the room. The man grunted in pain, but he quickly recovered, pushing Jaden back with surprising strength. The force of the push sent Jaden crashing into the kitchen counter, but he quickly regained his footing, his mind laser-focused on protecting his family. His mother and sister were frozen in fear, but Jaden couldn't afford to be distracted. The intruder was still standing, eyes blazing with fury. This was no ordinary attacker. This was a soldier of Carlton's, a man trained to eliminate threats. Jaden's heart raced as he glanced around the room, looking for anything that could give him an advantage. His eyes landed on the heavy kitchen knife block, and without thinking, he sprinted toward it, grabbing one of the blades and turning to face the intruder. The moment he gripped the handle, something inside him clicked. This wasn't just a fight for survival. It was a fight for his family, for everything he had fought for in the past weeks. The intruder advanced, but Jaden was faster. He launched himself forward, using the knife in his hand to deflect the attacker's blows. The room became a blur of movement, the sound of metal clashing with metal filling the air. Jaden could feel the adrenaline surging through him. His senses heightened as he fought with everything he had. But the attacker was relentless. Each move was calculated, every strike precise. Jaden could feel the exhaustion creeping in, his muscles beginning to burn as he struggled to keep up. He was no match for the sheer power and skill of the intruder, and he knew it. He needed to end this fight quickly, before it was too late. In a final, desperate move, Jaden feigned a strike to the left, then pivoted to the right, catching the attacker off guard. He drove the blade into the man's side. Hearing the sickening sound of metal piercing flesh, the intruder gasped, stumbling back. But Jaden wasn't finished. He couldn't stop now. With one last surge of strength, Jaden pushed the intruder to the ground, his chest heaving with exertion. The man lay there, gasping for breath, his eyes wide with shock. But before Jaden could catch his own breath, the door slammed open again, and another figure appeared. This time, there was no mistaking it. It was Carlton himself. Jaden's blood ran cold. This was the moment he had been dreading, the moment when Carlton would make his move. But Jaden wasn't afraid anymore. He had come this far, and there was no turning back. The final battle had begun.